Glory to Jesus Christ, my name is Father Vlad Zablatsky, and this is our 20th episode of the Orthodox Cooking Show. And with me I have today a very, very special guest, none other than our choir director, Zechariah Mandell. And he will show us today pepperoni rolls that he made for one of our fundraisers, and parishioners are still talking about it, and we're actually going to make the recipe today, and we'll feed our parishioners and treat our parishioners with this with a pizza roll. Zach comes from a family of great musicians and also a wonderful cook, so hopefully when the Lent comes in, I know his mom published some Lenten recipes, so we'll try.
Yes, a Lenten cookbook published through St. Vladimir's Press.
So
it was called When You Fast.
So we will try to do perhaps some recipes when the Lent comes from her book, and today we will let Zach show us the pepperoni. I never heard of pepperoni rolls before. I think that's a Pennsylvania
Yes,
staple.
it is a central Pennsylvania in general kind of tradition, I suppose. This particular recipe was perfected by my dad's aunt, my great aunt, his mother's sister. Aunt Ethel's pepperoni rolls were always the famous ones in our family. Then my mom kind of took on the tradition.
All right, so Mom, thank you. Thank you for this recipe, and I'm from now on I'll become a cameraman, and then we will let Zach do his thing and guide us through the recipe.
All right, so these are my great Aunt Ethel's famous pepperoni rolls. The recipe is not so difficult to make. It's a rather time-consuming process, so you do need to set aside a good chunk of your day to devote to this recipe, but it is definitely worth it in the end. First of all, we have 2 cups of warm water, not too hot, but warm, a little over room temperature. Sugar, about 1.5 cups for the recipe itself, plus a little bit extra, about a teaspoon for the yeast mixture, which we'll get to. 2 packages of yeast, or I always put a little more than that. I put about 5 teaspoons of yeast. We have the flour, any sort of unbleached, all-purpose flour is fine. 10 cups of that. 4 teaspoons of salt. The salt goes into the flour sugar mixture. Then we have 4 eggs already beaten, melted butter, some oil, about 1/2 cup, and then finally 2 sticks of pepperoni about this size. You can kind of fudge this for however much pepperoni you want in there. I always think the more the better. And with the pepperoni, depending on the brand you buy, as you see here, a lot of them have kind of a plastic skin around them, so you want to make sure, and this has happened before, but you want to make sure that you don't let that get into the rolls, quite obviously. So make sure when you get your pepperoni, just check, peel that skin off, then you can start cutting it up. The first step is to make the yeast sugar mixture. So we take just a teaspoon of the sugar, as well as all of the yeast, 5 teaspoons or so. Just whisk that all together. Using Father Vlad's favorite whisk, apparently. And then once it's all dissolved, once it's entirely dissolved, we can set this aside to prepare the flour. Now, with the yeast mixture already made, you can let that sit for about 5 minutes or so. You also don't necessarily have to whisk it. You can just let it dissolve of its own accord. But the 5 minutes, kind of a guideline, just as long as it then takes to prepare the flour mixture. So for the flour, we take about 4 teaspoons of the salt, and then the 1.5 cups of sugar. And the sugar is really, in my opinion, what makes these really shine. The sweet dough with the salty pepperoni is just such a wonderful flavor. Because of course with these we don't add cheese. There's no cheese in them, there's no sauce in them. So it's not going for necessarily a pizza taste, but it has kind of its own distinct and unique flavor. So having made kind of an indentation in the middle of the flour, we will add the yeast mixture, the yeast water, a little bit of sugar, the oil, 1/2 cup or so. Any vegetable oil will do, olive oil, whatever you prefer. The eggs, beaten of course. And the melted butter. And then we mix that together, okay, until you have a pulled together, relatively smooth dough. Most of the mixing can be done with either a wooden spoon or a rubber spatula. Those tend to work best. But just for the finishing touches, getting the last little bits of flour kind of worked in there, you can kind of just play with that a little bit before we turn it out onto the board to knead it. So once the dough is all mixed together, we can turn it out onto some sort of flat surface. We have a wooden board here, but of course, if you have a clean counter with no grooves, that's fine. And then it's just a matter of kneading it. Knead for about 8 minutes or until it's really just all together, smooth dough. Once your dough is entirely kneaded and feels right, you'll know what I mean.
Yeah.
Then lightly oil a bowl. Again, either vegetable oil, olive oil, whatever you prefer. I've used both. Then you can take your dough, put it in your bowl, and cover it with a cloth in a warm place for about 1.5 hours so that it can fully rise. Now, while the dough is rising for that 1.5 hours, you have a perfect window to cut up the pepperoni if you haven't done so already. So, you don't want slices that are too thick, but thick enough. You don't want skimpy pepperoni. You always want to get sticks and not pre-sliced, pre-packaged. So, I would even say this is probably the best thickness, or even something like this. But definitely not pre-packaged pepperoni. That's way too thin. You want these to be meaty, and this step takes a little while, but like I said, while the dough is rising, it's your perfect opportunity. Now keep in mind, when you're cutting the pepperoni, that the recipe makes 80 rolls, and the ideal number of slices per roll is 4. So, although, I mean, keeping track of every single piece, not entirely necessary, but you do want to end up with about 320 pieces. All right, once the dough has risen and doubled, you kind of want to just punch it down a little bit. And then once you've done that, bring it onto our surface. And now is really the start of the most time-consuming part here. Now we are going to be making the individual rolls. This takes a while, so again, the recipe takes a little bit. How I like to do this is divide the dough into 4 equal parts. Roughly 4 equal parts. And then we'll divide each of those parts equally. Kind of roll that into a ball. And then we'll roll out each individual part so that it's a little bit easier to manage. So now we have 8 individual balls of dough to deal with. Now we can start to roll those out. And you kind of want to roll them out as thinly as possible. Of course, not too thin. It might take a little bit because it is a rather dense dough. Alright, so you'll want your dough, I mean, if you are skilled enough to be able to get it basically square, good for you. If not, like me, I kind of go for something about twice as long as it is wide, because you will want the squares of dough for each pepperoni roll to be about 4 by 4 inches, okay? So now we can take this, cut it down the middle, and roughly get it so that you have basically even. These aren't quite, but that's okay. A little imprecision and a little bit of variety is the mark of homemade. Now, once you have each individual piece, and if you want to kind of adjust their proportion or whatever, you can always roll them individually, or fold them up individually and roll them again. But with a piece kind of like this, about 4 by 4 roughly, like I said, we'll take 3 or 4 pieces of the pepperoni, put them right in the center of the dough, overlapping, and then we will roll, as the name implies, the dough over. If you need to stretch it a little bit, you can do so. Kind of pinch the ends down underneath. And where the crease is, that's the bottom of the roll. So, as such, it's a pretty decent looking roll. All right, once you have cut your dough into the 10 roughly equal portions, if they don't come out entirely equally, that's fine. You can either fold them over again, like with this. I had to fold it over, it was too long, so I will roll that out to try to get it more even. But once you have them rolled out as such, you will take 3 or 4 pieces of the pepperoni. Always try for 4. The more pepperoni, the better. Put them right down the center of the dough with a little bit of breathing room on each side, and you will overlap the slices heavily. Then we'll take the dough and start rolling it over. Hence the name pepperoni rolls, of course. But we'll roll that over and try to cover up any sort of cracks or crevices that might form. The dough might seem a little thin in places. Try to cover that up as best as possible. Once it's folded over, take the edges, or the ends, I should say, the ends, fold them in, and then we can put them on the baking pan and crease side down. So the crease is the bottom. We put that on the bottom. If you put them like this, obviously it'll turn out just as tasty, but it might crack open. All right, once you have the pepperoni rolls on your tray, and you can either have a greased baking pan or put it on parchment paper. Then, with your oven having been preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, we can put them in. You can put more than one pan in at a time. You'll have to flip one or the other, just for the sake of making sure they are evenly golden. But once they turn about gold, should take about 14 to 16 minutes. They're done and you can enjoy. All right, now, close to the end, here we have 2 in. But close to the end, we just want a light golden brown on the top. These are getting just about done. And on the bottom, see, they need a little bit more time because we want just a little bit more brown there. But you'll have brown on the bottom and just a light golden on the top. That's just about there. The one thing that you can run into is that the tops might not seem like they're done. They might not look done because they'll be just barely golden. But if you let them get too brown, the dough dries out. And right here, now we have our final batch. They are done. You can see just a little bit gold on the top, very light, but on the bottom, a nice even browning. Can't wait to eat them.
Well, it was wonderful afternoon, and I thank you, Zach, for coming.
Well, thank you.
They turn out really good, and if you can just take a shot at them, you know, the ones that are not perfect are mine, because I never did them before, but Zach did most of them, and this is a perfection, right, Zach?
Perfection, absolutely.
Yep. And we were talking with Zach about this roll. Well, let's cut it in and let's see how does it look inside. So this is how it looks inside. And boy, do they taste good. They really, you kind of it's a perfect for a student's late night snack, game, some sort of entertainment. Really, really nice. So thank you, Zach, for coming in and sharing this with us.
Oh, thank you. It was my pleasure. They're served best anyway. Hot out of the oven or cold the next day. They're fantastic.
And I tried them cold, so I can testify to that. So if you like this video, give us a thumbs up on YouTube, share it with your friends on Facebook, and come and see more videos.